move CSA to slash the expenditure in this regard. Thank you.
Mr. Poon Siu-ping. Madam Deputy, in the 2019-20 budget announced by the Financial Secretary, it wasn't well received by the public. According to the HKU POP survey, a survey last month showed that 52.4% of the people were strongly dissatisfied and only 19.4% were satisfied, and the results were hardly surprising. The livelihood measures in this budget were lacking, and in the last budget, I criticized the Financial Secretary for the complicated procedures associated with the $4,000 handout. The procedures were convoluted and it was extremely inconvenient. It could not ease the dissatisfaction of the community. The $4,000 measure is still being processed, and people are eligible. People are still made to wait, and they grew more dissatisfied with the government. In the current budget, the FS did not even roll out patch-up measures, and all we saw were regular measures such as rebate of profits tax and rates concessions, and $2,500 worth of subsidy will be distributed to students. So apparently they have a bit of everything, but more likely they are just going through the motions compared with the $1,000 billion Lantau Tomorrow Vision reclamation project. And $45 billion would be invested in I&T development. And it's natural that people would be dissatisfied. For the Hong Kong and Kowloon Labour Federation, they criticize the budget as lacking any short-term support and measures. The budget speech did not mention anything about labor policy. In last year's budget, the FS earmarked $15 billion for MPF offsetting. And they are working on increasing the manpower level. I have always been monitoring occupational safety, and in the Safety Officer 1 and 2 establishments, the manpower provision has been enhanced, but the actual number of officers has come down. The government should review the reason behind the lack of safety officers, and the situation should be improved immediately. I wonder if this has to do with the lack of safety inspectors in the Labor Department, and the survey conducted on safety inspectors is unreasonable. The number of inspections is not based on the number of checks, but rather the number of officers. If 2 inspectors visit one site in one go, it would be considered 2 inspections. If this visit is made by 3 inspectors, it would be counted as 3 visits. This methodology cannot reflect the actual situation, and the results are often misleading. I hope the government would improve the methodology of such surveys. And in terms of transport policy, the budget again proposed electronic road pricing as a means to ease congestion, and the Transport Department and relevant departments are exploring the use of smart parking spaces and to crack down on illegal parking. In order to tackle traffic congestion in Hong Kong, we must look at the source of the problem, that is the number of vehicles on the roads. The use of technology in parking is a global trend. And apart from introducing electronic road pricing, the government should also review the manpower deployment, and there must be enough flexibility under the electronic management approach, and this would be beneficial to professional drivers. The electronic road pricing scheme is yet to be launched. I do not know whether the plan would be shelved, just like the toll rationalization scheme. Regardless of the outcome of the scheme, the government must allocate more resources to improve public transport services. Madam Deputy, the FS mentioned in his budget speech that unemployment rate remained at 2.8%, which was a low in the last 20 years. And the FS said that the labor force remains stable, and people's livelihood has improved, but a low unemployment rate has no direct relation to the livelihood of the grassroots. According to a latest study by The Economist, Hong Kong has the highest cost of living in the world. There are no standard working hours in Hong Kong, and our employees do not enjoy universal retirement protection. The minimum wage enjoyed by grassroots is far less than the level required, and with the prices of commodities going up, and the prices have gone up far higher than the inflation rate of 2.6%. So the FS said people's livelihoods have been improved, but this is not the case. The labor market is still in a tight situation, and the Labor Confederation is concerned about the productivity yet to be released by the 250,000 home carers. And the Federation also conducted a study on childcare services. Many respondents felt that the number of childcare places is too little and the waiting times are too long. More than half the respondents felt that the fact that they have to take care of children would affect their employment choices, and many parents complain that there's a lack of community support for childcare, and they cannot strike a balance between family and work, and many women cannot go to work as a result. And among the 250 persons who arrive in Hong Kong every day for reunion, there are a lot of women who are fit for employment. The government should help them find employment, and measures should be available to help them find employment. That way we can release the potential productivity. As for the lack of manpower at elderly care homes, there were reports that foreign domestic helpers who take part in the Labor Department's pilot scheme can be employed by subvented homes. The Secretary for Labor and Welfare clarified the issue, but nonetheless there are still concerns from the sector. And the Labor Advisory Board has suggested expanding the import of labor, and I am against the idea. The government should first improve the remuneration of workers in elderly care homes, and the government should complete and announce the study on the increase in remuneration for workers in subvented institutes as soon as possible. And in terms of providing training to local women so that they can work in subvented homes, there should be flexibility, and we should allow housewives to work in care homes in order to release their productivity. In terms of social welfare, the FS earmarked $20 billion to purchase 20 properties to provide more than 130 welfare facilities, including day child care centers, elderly neighborhood centers, on-site school rehab services, etc. As the Secretary for Labor and Welfare said, there is a shortage of services at the moment, and the waiting times are getting longer and longer. Some elderly people pass away while waiting. This shows a serious shortage in community services. The acquisition of properties for the purpose of providing services can ease the waiting time, but the $20 billion is still inadequate. It cannot completely fill the demand. For the for these properties, I'm concerned about the choice of venue, and I hope the government would make the best use of the resources. Madam Deputy, in terms of the new allocations, I welcome the government's move to provide another $700 million to the hospital authority as recurrent expenditure, which would help retain talent. One of the measures is to raise the salaries of ward support staff. After the budget was announced, the HA further refined their salary adjustment proposal to answer the calls of the auxiliary medical staff. But more allocations would be required to meet the cost. In terms of resources, I hope the government can offer support and ensure that the funds are utilized properly. And the pay rise proposal currently does not cover auxiliary medical staff who joined before the year 2000. According to HA representatives, by September at the earliest, a pay rise proposal would be offered for these staff. The government should urge the HA to complete the work as soon as possible, and the HA should also listen to views of its staff. Madam Deputy, as for the 5-day work policy among the civil servants, the policy has been implemented for 13 years. Currently, more than 20% of the civil servants cannot enjoy a 5-day work week, and the relevant policy must be reviewed holistically so that all civil servants can enjoy a 5-day work week. And in terms of resources, the FS must provide support. The government promised in the budget that Chinese medicine is incorporated in civil service, as one of the civil service benefits. However, there is a lack of support towards this area. I hope the government would fulfill its promise as soon as possible. Thank you.
Mr. Ho Kai-ming. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I will share with you the views of the FTU, in particular, policies related to the elderly as well as the children. Regarding this year's budget, it is not a budget that we are happy with, but then the FS is lucky because he would not be criticized, because everybody is trying to focus on the gossip news. However, I just want to point out that perhaps Professor Yang may not know what I'm trying to say. Probably Mr. Kevin Yeung would know. I think Mr. Kenneth Ma, the actor, is a honorable man. He has been hurt, and yet he tries to protect his girlfriend. I think such a broadness of mind is not easy to have. In fact, a lot of us in the population of Hong Kong are really impressed by what he said, and I think it is what we should have when it comes to broadness of mind. This is particularly so for the public officers in the administration. Mr. Paul Chen is a male public officer. I want to know whether he has given adequate protection to the female population. I think we may not doubt his masculinity, but then I think he hasn't given us adequate protection. Mr. Paul Chen, in his consultation exercise, has asked us to pass the ball to him, but he hasn't really done a good job. We have been trying to score, but we didn't. Now, we see many problems in our society: an aging population, a low birth rate. The FTU made many recommendations, but none of them have been picked up by the FS. First of all, the birth rate in Hong Kong. It is always on the low side. I think a city should rely on itself to keep the population young. That is, a couple should have 2 children or more. That is a replacement rate of 2 in order to keep the population at the right age profile. In Hong Kong, the birth rate is only 1.125. Many couples do not want to raise a family. Long working hours, a small living space, lack of childcare, and lack of time to parent the children. As a result, many Hong Kong couples are not interested and not willing to raise a family. Long working hours, etc., are not something that we can address within the budget. However, the FS can certainly set aside resources to ease the burden of the parents. First of all, we have suggested to the administration that $3 billion should be set aside as a subsidy for newborn babies so that parents can be given some help so as to meet the expenses arising from the arrival of a new baby. And then we need to set up an education fund. Well, the tuition fees have been kept at the same level, $42,100 per year if you pursue your studies locally, but then the amount would be much greater than that if you go overseas. So I think we should set up an education fund with contributions from both the parents and the government, and then we can ease the burden on the families when their children have to go overseas to pursue their studies. But of course, the idea hasn't been picked up by the FS. The establishment of funds would take time, and this is something that we understand. However, there are also recommendations for instant measures from the FTU. Say, for example, I think we should give $2,000 to each student. We proposed the idea, but then probably it has been dismissed as a result of the administrative hurdles or the administrative costs. Now, only 1/3 of the students are able to draw a subsidy in the form of a textbook allowance or transport subsidy. But we do hope that next year you will give the money to each and every student if you can't have a cash handout for each and every citizen, because it will certainly help students and their families in meeting the educational expenditure. For Singapore, our major competitor, when faced with a low birth rate, gave out a subsidy for children, a 3-day baby leave, as well as a bonus for having newborn babies. Well, I think on the contrary, Hong Kong's policy is such that we don't discourage having children, but at the same time, we don't have anything proactive to encourage a higher birth rate. We need to spend money to resolve such a problem. I think it's still too bound on the part of the government to do something about it. Now, for Singapore, they have got a childcare subsidy. We need the same in Hong Kong. Prior to the budget, we interviewed 800 female interviewees. most of them agreed that there should be a childcare subsidy. As many as 70% of them told us that the childcare services in their neighborhood were grossly inadequate. 80% of them would like to have something like a childcare vouchers so that they can look for the right service providers. Now, when there is an inadequate supply of childcare service, then parents have to ask their elderly parents or engage a foreign domestic helper to take care of the young children. Or else the mothers have to stay home. In fact, we have a large number of mothers who are prevented from going out to join the labor force. Instead of having importation of foreign labor, perhaps we should put in more efforts to think of ways to release such a potential labor force. Of course, Mr. Kevin Young, perhaps at kindergartens, primary schools, secondary schools, you can also think along the line of introducing childcare facilities. The government's commitment would be necessary. In particular, inter-bureau or departmental efforts would be needed. We have $150 million being spent on increasing the number of childcare places. But then we have 56,000 new births, and so this enhancement would be too little to meet the extra demand. 400 more places will be provided, but there's only a measure to who's our CSRA. It's on the tip of my tongue. I've forgotten his or her name. Who was the secretary at the time? Who's our CS now? Matthew Jiang. Sorry about that. Matthew Jiang, who was the Secretary for Labor and Welfare, did suggest that there would be 1,000 more places. So 400 more this year means that we have only increased the number by 900. So the government has not delivered on this front. It is unacceptable. For 10 years, still the promise hasn't been honored. It is indeed embarrassing. Well, of course, we have the community nanny scheme, but then we need to give them more training. In fact, there is a genuine demand for such community nannies. However, it isn't a proper job, quite unlike a helper helping the new mothers in the first month or two. And we can't take out an insurance policy. For community nannies, they don't even enjoy the statutory minimum wage rate, and they don't actually draw a salary. In fact, it is only something like a bonus or a subsidy. So we need a registration system. We need training for the community nannies. Perhaps we can learn from the experience of Taiwan, but I'm afraid the budget is silent on this matter. So I'll call upon the administration to help the working mothers or mothers who have the potential to rejoin the labor force. And of course, we have also got this other proposal. For the children in the age groups of 0 to 2 and 3 to 6, they should get a different subsidy respectively, so the parents can spend the money on after-school care or community nannies, and then such mothers can rejoin the labor force. Now I come to the case of the elderly people. Only 336 job seekers were able to make use of the middle-age employment scheme, which then covered those after the age of 60 to get a job. Yesterday, there was the audit's report, and in fact, the lack of effectiveness of such a job matching scheme has been criticized. Now, for the elderly people in Hong Kong, we have a problem of elderly poverty. It appears to me that we haven't got a proper set of measures to make sure that the retirees can have ease of mind, and we haven't got a universal retirement protection scheme. Many old people have to work so as to make their ends meet. This is not desirable. Well, in last year's budget, the eligible age the eligible age for elderly CSSA was lowered from 65 to 60. I think we need to do much more to help the elderly citizens. They've been working hard for decades to contribute to the success of Hong Kong. For the young old, so to speak, they are willing to continue to work. The government has also asked them to continue working, but have we given them any or adequate assistance? It seems that we haven't got any specific labor policies to help them. So for this budget, it is barely acceptable. We will support it, but after endorsing the budget, I think the government should carry out a review and do more for them. Of course, it takes money to launch policies. Well, we haven't got a surplus as large as last year's, and so that's the reason or the excuse for not doubling the extra allowance given to the CSSA's recipients. I think it would only take us $30 billion more if we are to give another month's allowance to the Social Security recipients. So, in fact, this year we have again a case of underestimation of our revenue. So, in fact, the government can think of other ways to spend our surplus wisely. We have got $1.2 trillion in our fiscal reserves. If we allow the money to sit in the public coffers and we continue to be conservative about our revenue forecast, it means that we can't share the fruit of prosperity with the citizens. Whether the government has got the money or not, childcare, housing, healthcare, transport, elderly are all issues that we have to focus on and resolve them. We need to think hard so as to come up with the right plans to help them. Unfortunately, even when we hand out sweeteners or hand out cash to the citizens, it has become a very clumsy job. I don't know how long it will take to give the applicants each $4,000. I don't think we should sit on the fiscal reserves of $1.2 trillion. I don't think that's what's meant by the new fiscal philosophy of the current CE. I think what she meant was that we would like to break down the hurdles and we should deregulate. However, we have yet to see anything brand new or innovative. And that's why we have said that we're going to support the budget, but it is barely palatable. Now, we have had over 10 sessions of consultation exercises, but still the budget is not very good.
Mr. Gary Chen. Thank you, Madam Deputy. There are so many issues that we have to show concerns. We have the issues of concern in the showbiz page, and we have issues of concern in the political page. But I'm not sure whether you've noticed a report. The FS seems to have got the surplus wrong. It seems that the surplus is way more than he anticipated. Every time we look at the budget, the Financial Secretary would consult us, and each year we would go to meet the Financial Secretary armed with our proposal. We have put forward 150 proposals. Not all of them have been taken on board, hasten to add. But for the items that are rejected, he would cite the same old reason. We don't have that much in the way of resources, and money is tight. But each year, from the newspaper, we learned that the forecast is out, is off the mark. When we propose so many livelihood issues and proposals, you're not taking them on board, but you've got your surplus forecast wrong, and you're putting this extra money away and not helping the people, and that's where the resentment lies. I think it's only right that you can't do all these measures because of the financial difficulties. But with so much in the surplus, you're not doing anything to help the middle class and also the grassroots people. And it's simply not on. I'd like to highlight 3 issues. The first one is housing. There is a paragraph about the budget. The turnover and the pricing have softened, but the prices are still out of step with the affordability of the public. End of quote. This is what the budget said a couple of months ago. And the market has not softened. The market has gone up again. And all these short-term, medium, and long-term measures, how much will they be of help to the members of the public? And all these short, medium, and long-term measures that the government are talking about are not the same as what we have in mind. For the short term, the government talks about transitional housing. How many transitional housing units do we have? We have about 100 or so from the Lok Sin Tong. If we really want to achieve what the chief executive told us, it would take an awful long time. The short-term measures are there to help the members of the public to resolve their problems. If you're suffering from a headache, you pop a pill to alleviate the pain. If you pop the pill and the effect will not be shown until a week from now, then you're not going to pop the pill. So what we are proposing in the way of short-term measures would be able to help those who are living in atrocious living conditions. There are many reports that depict the diabolical situation. Some are living rough in the cyber cafe, in McDonald's, and so on. Some drop dead in the course of work. Now, these may be extreme examples, but should we allow all these examples to take place in our affluent society? If they don't have a place in our society, you should do something to help solve the housing problems. If I can have somewhere to live in, why will I bother living rough on the street, in McDonald's, and in the cyber cafes? Now, if you offer some, we're suggesting that you offer some rental assistance to those in need. You said that this is not possible because this would boost the rents. That might be the case, but when we offer the rental assistance, we're not going to tell the landlords, the tenants don't have to go tell the landlords that they are coming with the rental assistance because they would be exploited. That's a simple economic theory, and that's the imbalance of information. You don't have to tell the landlords that you have the assistance from the government. But with a couple of $1,000s in rental assistance, that would alleviate the accommodation difficulties that they encounter. And you're setting your face against it, despite the money that you have at your disposal. Transitional housing. Other than the Lok Sin Tong housing that I alluded to a moment ago, 3 administrations ago. In fact, Donald Tsang did refer to this, although he talked about this in terms of a youth hostel. Now, we have seen 3 administrations. How many youth hostels have we seen coming on stream? None. How can you call these medium-term measures? How can you call them short-term measures? Now, you talked about transitional housing, $2 billion will be set aside for the NGOs. But how fast are they moving? My understanding is that Lok Sin Tong is saying that they're converting a primary school into transitional housing. But the advanced expenditure like site investigation, the drawings and technical matters, all these will cost them at least more than $10 billion. And that doesn't come out of the $2 billion. You're commissioning them to do it, and you're not dispersing the funding. They're not doing this for charity. And it must be they must control the cost before they would be able to lend a helping hand. So I think you should do something to help build more transitional housing if this is your policy. The second issue is healthcare. Now we keep talking about the manpower shortfall. Now, what concerns me is the dental care. Now, let me cite you a figure. Primary students, they have dental care. Elderly people, they have the voucher scheme for them to have dental care. What about adults? If they have tooth pain, what's going to happen? There are 11 dental clinics. If you have a dental problem, you go queue up each week. There are 870 acute quota. That's the quota for 7 million people in Hong Kong. The number is 870 for 7 million people in Hong Kong. That's the public dental care. How are you going to address the problem? Not everybody will be suffering from dental problems, and not everybody is suffering from dental problems. We go to public dental clinic, but indeed there are many adults who simply cannot afford the exorbitant cost in the private sector. I've heard of an elderly person. He went to the mainland for dental treatment. There are some working adults who told me that they would get up at the crack of dawn at 5, and they would be waiting for 3 hours for the clinic to open. And within a matter of 15 minutes, all the quotas would be gone. And if they can't get a quota, they will have to come back next week. We have $1 trillion in our reserves. Is this the kind of service that the government should be providing? The secretary might tell us that we don't have enough dentists, we don't have enough dental assistants. You can crank up the resources. Are you putting in the $50 billion in healthcare? You have $100 billion for the building program for hospitals. Why don't you do something about the dental care? I'm not sure whether you know about it or not. In Hong Kong, we have entered into an agreement with the WTO to make sure that each citizen we have to make sure that they should have at least 20 teeth in their mouths for those who are 60 to 80 years of age. Are we able to achieve that? I am really concerned. By the time we hit 60, I'm not sure whether we have that many teeth in our mouth. Madam Deputy, there are some goodies in the budget. I am very concerned about animal welfare. The government has offered some assistance to the family welfare groups for them to take forward their activities. We didn't see that ever before. And initially, they shell out 1 million, and then it was snatched back to $500,000. This year, it's gone back up to 1 million. It shows that the government is setting store by animal welfare Now we have all these rigorous vetting procedures to disperse the $1 billion, and that's all for the good. There are many welfare groups that are raising funds themselves, and the volunteers are helping the animals out of their own pocket. It's simply not good enough to throw money at the problem. But the thing is, we don't have a good enough protection legislation for animals. We're going to make sure that the government does it. The other thing is euthanizing the animals. We don't want to see a cat or a dog or indeed an animal being euthanized. I've put a question at the Special Finance Committee, and you can see that over the past 3 years, the dogs, cats, and other animals that have been put down over the past 3 years have come down in numbers, but still the number is staggering. 2018, 1,000 dogs have been put down, 330 cats have been put down, 5,000 other animals have been put down, maybe rabbits or maybe hamsters, and they have been put down. The number has come down, but still very staggering. Someone told me that if I pick up a stray animal, I wouldn't hand it over to the AFCD because I know for sure that it's going to be put down. And the number has come down on the part of the AFCD. I think negatively, this may be an explanation. Undoubtedly, the AFCD has done something positive over the years, but each year we are talking about 6,000 or 7,000 animals that have been put down, and that's wholly undesirable. The AFCD told us that they are being more humanistic. They have the TNR, trap, neuter, and release program. They've been tried out for 2 years. So the AFCD said it's not achieving really tangible results. You have trialed these in 2 districts. There are 16 more districts you can trial. I asked the AFCD about it at the Special Finance Committee, and they told us that they keep their options open, and they are prepared to do it if someone were to come along with an application. But you must have a budget. Without a budget, how on earth are you going to get this done? Also, it is AFCD's duty to deal with the stray animals in a humane manner. It's not for the NGOs to do what they're helping you. You shouldn't shift the burden onto the welfare organizations themselves, because this is not the right thing to do. So I do hope that the administration would, with the colossal reserves, would do something to help the animals in the community. I hope that the Financial Secretary, he may have got the surplus projection wrong. I hope that when we go and see him armed with this proposal, he would be prepared to listen to us more instead of fobbing us off with no money.
Mr. Yu Si-wing. Madam Deputy, I speak in support of the budget. The budget is able to execute the policy promulgated in the policy address, and there are allocations to areas like welfare, education, etc. And the expenditure is $607.8 billion, up 10% from last year, and the expenditure ratio has risen to 97%, and yet the government would not fall into a deficit. Apart from a prudent fiscal policy, the government must minimize administrative costs. For the $4,000 cash handout last year, the intention was certainly good, but the administrative procedures were too complicated, and undue costs were incurred, and it attracted a lot of criticism. The government should learn a lesson and avoid such episodes in the future. Given the difficult global circumstances this year and the U.S.-China trade tensions, Hong Kong would inevitably be affected. And in 2003, after SARS, Hong Kong's economy plummeted. The Central People's Government launched the Free Individual Traveller Scheme, and the economy of Hong Kong soon rebounded. The budget acknowledged the role of tourism, and more support would be given to the sector. The Hong Kong Tourism Board is given an extra $350 million, which is up $2.4 billion compared with previous year. And it shows that the government seeks to develop tourism as a means to stimulate our economy. For inbound and outbound tourism in 2018, the picture was satisfactory. The number of inbound visitors last year was 65 million visitors, up 11.4% compared with 2017. For outbound visitors, the rise was 8.1% compared with the previous year. Sales also improved, and affected by a change in the spending habits of visitors, the retail industry did not perform well. In terms of the value of goods sold, there was a growth of 8.8%, but it was lower than the growth in the number of visitors. And it shows that the retail sector is affected by the spending sentiments, and allocating more resources to the tourism board would be an answer to the problem. Madam Deputy, internet shopping has become popular in recent years, and retail has been somewhat affected. For small, medium, and micro enterprises who are travel agents, they are finding business very difficult. Many owners have to branch out to other businesses in order to survive. For the last two budgets, no waivers were given to on the license fees of tour operators, and this is somewhat disappointing. I hope the license fees for travel agencies could be waived. The Tourism Industry Authority would be set up, and $350 million would be earmarked as a seed fund of the TIA. I find this allocation too conservative. For the Insurance Authority, the initial funding for the seed money of the TIA should be increased to $500 million. The TIA would be a self-financing body, and the license fees charged on tour agencies would be a major source of revenue. If the seed money is exhausted or go to zero, the additional burden would fall on the tour agencies. In other words, the license fees could be raised by the TIA, and other charges can be levied. For small, medium, and micro tour agencies, their burden would be even heavier. Madam Deputy, Hong Kong is an important tourism destination in the region. Direct and indirect employment amounts to nearly 800,000 people. In order to maintain our edge and to promote the tourism industry, apart from the support measures for tourism in the budget, I also pay attention to other relevant measures. I hope the budget can achieve satisfactory results, and I'm also concerned about public toilets in Hong Kong. Last year at the CE's question and answer session, I mentioned that the hygiene level of public toilets was dissatisfactory, especially in tourism spots, and it affected Hong Kong's reputation. Hong Kong should engage in a revolution for public toilets like the mainland, and the CE responded positively to the proposal, and the government came up with a plan to improve public toilets in 23 tourist spots, and this year's budget has earmarked $600 million in the next 5 years to renovate 56 public toilets. I hope the work can begin as soon as possible. And over the course of such reform, apart from upgrading hardware and introducing smart elements, the government must also review the outsourcing of cleaners, review the tendering scheme, and introduce a mechanism for incentives and punishments. With the development of big data, the government should maintain statistics on the more frequented public toilets during week hours, so that the government would be able to allocate manpower according to demand, and cleaning should be stepped up for the more popular toilets, and by connecting or interfacing with the electronic public toilets map, users can be directed to the appropriate public toilets to avoid congestion, and this is certainly very useful for the popular tourist spots. And I hope more technologies can be introduced to enhance the level of management and hygiene for public toilets. And I'd like to talk about a lack of MICE venues as well. Hong Kong is the MICE hub in Asia Pacific, but in recent years, Singapore and Thailand have focused on MICE development in recent years, while the neighboring Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and Macau have enhanced the investments on hardware and software, and concessions are offered to attract exhibitors. Competition is intense, and Hong Kong is facing grave challenge from our neighbors, and we face a great shortage of venues, according to a study from the government. For the HKCEC and Asia World Expo in 2018, and the number of days in which all the venues were utilized were 75 and 81 days immediately, and a number of and 17 and 20 meetings were rejected due to full utilization of both venues. The situation at AWE should be somewhat better, but from the statistics, we can see that it has become even more saturated than the HKCEC. So the proposal to relocate 3 government buildings in Wan Chai for MICE development purposes is a good idea, but it will only be completed by 2026, and the timeline is extremely long. We do not expect HKCEC expansion to be completed in 10 years. And through the airport authority, the government is exploring an expansion to the Asia World Expo, but we do not know when it will be completed. And the supply of large MICE venues in Hong Kong is extremely limited, and facing the challenge on competition from members, the government must establish short, medium, and long-term measures, or else Hong Kong's status as a MICE hub would be under threat. The budget allocated $3 million for a smart tourism consultancy study, but according to information at the Finance Committee, the government does not set specific requirements on the consultancy study. As the proponent of the study, the government should understand what is meant by smart tourism, and there should be basic objectives. We should look at the visitors, the government, and tourism destinations, and a smart tourism plan must provide personalized services to visitors and enhance their overall experience in terms of attractions. By utilizing technology, products and tourism services should be enhanced substantially. And through collecting and analyzing big data, the government should understand the consumption habits of visitors as well as information on Hong Kong's transportation, and that would help with policy making. Through this consultancy study, the government should rationalize the tourism planning and establish specific plans for the future. And I'd like to talk about harbourfront development. The budget earmarked $6 billion for new waterfront promenades and new public open space and enhancement of harbourfront facilities. And the Victoria harbourfront, the shoreline would increase from 20 to 34 kilometers, and 35 hectares of open space would be provided. The length of the shoreline is not the only indicator. What is important is the overall planning and impression to users. We need systematic connection between the waterfronts if we are to maximize our advantage. The stretch of waterfront from Saiwan to Central is unique, and the government should establish clear planning guidelines, and it will certainly be popular to visitors and tourists. And the government can learn from successful experience, including public-private partnership, and the Avenue of Stars is one of the more successful examples. The project received an investment of $40 million from New World, and they operated the venue for 20 years. And they worked with the tourism and film sectors, and it was converted into a landmark, and it is one of the most popular tourism spots today. For the Western food market, and it was a signature project scheme of the Central and Western District Council. And the harbourfront site was released and developed into a harbourfront section. And the views of the public were collected to form the basis of the development, and with the support of the district council and district stakeholders, the development can meet the needs of the residents. Hong Kong's harbourfront is a valuable resource, and it should be utilized properly by the government in order to foster greater vibrancy for Hong Kong. For Hong Kong Disneyland, it has recorded a loss for 4 straight years, and in 2018, the attendance rose by 8% to 6.7 million. Even though it cannot meet the target of 7.5 million, and revenue increased by 15% to $6 billion, and EBITDA reached $1.35 billion, and it was a historical high, and the operating deficit was $54 million. So whether or not Hong Kong Disneyland makes a profit, the Walt Disney Company would charge a management fee, and going forward, the total revenue will certainly go up if the Walt Disney Company continues to charge a management fee. It is unfair. And if Hong Kong Disneyland makes a loss, the patent fees and management fees should be waived. Thank you.
Mr. Jimmy Ng, thank you, Madam Deputy. According to the budget, government expenditure will continue to grow. An increase of 13.4% when compared with the previous year. In other words, it showcases the new fiscal philosophy of the current term government. That is, while being cautious about public finance, it will be strategic and visionary so as to invest for Hong Kong and to ease the burden of the people of Hong Kong. However, this year we haven't got as generous a surplus as last year, so the government has been conservative this year, and I can understand the philosophy. Now, the administration would like to support the enterprises, safeguard jobs, strengthen livelihoods, and stabilize the economy. It appears that it is a balanced one, and it appears that the wording has been well chosen. It is beyond criticism. But of course, Hong Kong is a free economy. It is not going to please everybody. On the day following the budget, I read the editorial of different papers. I think most of the editors would like to put in some positive words of criticism. Take Wen Wei-Pao as an example. He said that in promoting creative industries, reindustrialization, and innovation technology, well, the impression is that what is being proposed cannot meet the requirements so as to to ride on the new opportunities. $5.5 billion for Cyberport 5 and $16 billion for the UGC universities to renovate their campus facilities, in particular to boost research and development. But other than that, there isn't anything remarkable. And according to the Economic Times, the FS, in terms of economic development, would like to boost innovation technology and financial services. That's encouraging, but then we are still lagging behind in terms of our rules and regulations. In any event, I think we can tie in with the broad direction of development of our motherland. Second, it can echo the initiatives and the policy address. I think the budget is right in mastering the broad directions. The Greater Bay Area was mentioned 11 times. The outline development plan of the GBA is important for us. We have to ride on this golden opportunity, and then we can expand our capacity, and we can enter a new era. In the budget, the FS has responded to the calls of the business sector, including myself. First of all, $2 billion to be spent on reindustrialization subsidy scheme. This is to be welcome. And then I believe that the government should take a holistic view and come up with a reindustrialization policy so that in the long term we can transform our industrial structure. Well, of course, the administration has already the government should also come up with a plan in the coming 6 months in relation to reindustrialization and innovation. And then for enterprises or industries which are promising, like Chinese medicine, food, etc., we should unleash the potential. And then for traditional industries, we should re-engineer the positioning, and we should have targeted fiscal subsidies. For the micro and SMEs, the government is going to waive the business registration fees. This is to be welcome. That's what we have asked for. Other than continuing with the waiver of the business registration fees, there should be something more regular in nature or more recurrent in nature. I think more businesses should be able to meet the eligibility criteria, and limited company should be on a par with the partnership as well as sole proprietorship. And like Singapore, I think for dedicated industries, the business registration fees will be waived forever. And then in paragraph 110 of the budget, it is said that the government would keep a close watch on the external and local economic situation, introduce appropriate measures when necessary to support enterprises and stabilize the economy. Well, with so much looming in the global landscape, I think the government should come up with the appropriate measures to ease the burden on the SMEs. Understand that $300 million will be reserved for a number of projects like the 3D digital map. Well, while we are on this matter, well, I think Google Map is the dragonhead, but it is not quite reliable. 2 years ago, when we were having a discussion about innovation technology in relation to the River Loop and Lok Ma Chau, well, in fact, there was a mistake in the Google Map information. The River Loop site was included in Shenzhen's boundary, and it wasn't regarded as part of Hong Kong. I don't know whether the government has followed this up. As of now, when you look up the Google Map, it still hasn't been ratified. I don't know whether we haven't pointed out the error to Google or whether it has chosen not to rectify the situation. A lot of our high-tech a lot of the high-tech products from mainland China have been rejected. So if we allow this mistake to be stand unrectified, our products may be regarded as Chinese products, and we may have a problem. So we need to develop our own 3D digital maps, and we should do a better job than Google Map. According to the Legislative Secretariat's research for the financial services industry, they have recorded a growth of 19% in relation to our GDP share. And then for logistics, it has shrunken to 21.5%. If we look at the respective share of our GDP, so I have a question mark here. For the cultural and creative industries, they're supposed to have huge potential of growth, but it appears that they have lost the momentum of growth. As far as the GDP growth is concerned, it is now only 4.4% in the year 2017, and the rate has been falling all the time. The government will spend $3 billion to promote the industries, but then we're seeing a downward trend, so perhaps the government should review its position, that is, whether it is effective to provide the subsidy in the same approach. And then for innovation technology, I don't think the picture is optimistic. Yes, in the past few years, the government has been setting aside a lot of money to promote innovation technology, but then its share of GDP between 2013 and 2017, it is on average 0.7%. We haven't seen a remarkable growth. Of course, it takes time. It is quite unlike getting an instant result. I can appreciate that. But then we have to learn from the experience of the case of promoting creative industries. We have to guard against a lack of sustainable growth. Yes, we need to diversify our economy, and we cannot afford to fail. The government should be on the alert, and the government should make sure that innovation technology will take up a growing share of our GDP. And we must guard against the social problems arising from lack of diversity in our economic structure. Say, for example, over-reliance on the property market and a growing wealth gap. Now, Hong Kong has been regarded as a blessed place. Despite all the fluctuations and volatilities, we have always been able to ride on the new opportunities, and we have become the dragonhead of Asia. Now, what is presented to us is another historic moment. That is the development of the Greater Bay Area. I think we can find our new role in the course of reindustrialization. The budget may not bring any surprising news, but then I think it is still a budget that should have my support. So I spoke. Thank you.
郭偉強議員。
Mr. Kwok Wai-kang. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I rise to speak in support of the Appropriation Bill. Last year, the surplus was $58.7 billion, but when they close the book, it goes beyond $100 billion, and our reserves are something like $1 trillion. And we're sitting on a lot of resources. But the wealth gap in Hong Kong is one of the worst in the world. In 2016, the by census shows that the Gini coefficient is 0.539, and the poverty gap is getting wider and wider. The Gini coefficient after the welfare intervention, it is still 0.4% compared with other jurisdictions. Singapore at 0.35, the US 0.39, the UK 0.35, 0.31 for Canada. The situation in Hong Kong is pretty dire. and it is one of the highest in advanced jurisdictions. In November, the government published the poverty situation. In 2017, we have 1.37 billion people in poverty, 20% of the population. After policy intervention, we still have 14.7% who are mired in poverty. Everything has to be equitable. The government is sitting on colossal reserves. We don't have debt. Certainly, the government can do a lot more for the needy people and provide equal opportunities. Despite the bountiful reserves, the government is merely increasing the expenditure in a symbolic manner. There is no long-term commitment. We must be aware that the poverty gap is one of the contributing factors to the deep-seated conflicts. So to alleviate or to eliminate the wealth gap is the government's priority task. The government might argue that they've done it. They have redistributed the wealth. They've collected the tax. The chief executive formulated the policy of two-tier profits tax. Of course, the SMEs will stand to benefit. The large conglomerates will still stand to benefit. For the first $2 million. They have their tax halved. The FTU proposes that there should be a progressive profits tax if they earn more than $10 billion, or 1 or 2% more. If they make $100 million, there should be a higher percentage. The more able they can afford, the more they should pay. This two-tier profits tax actually has cancelled out a lot of the redistribution work. There are many landlords who own multiple number of properties, and they are making a lot of money through speculation, through trading. Why don't we have any capital gains tax to bring in more revenue and to enable the government to deploy more resources to the poor? Given the large resources, many people are clamoring for cash handouts. But the government just listened to the opposition members and chose to give cash handouts on a selective basis. Now the nothing people don't benefit at all, and the housewives are toiling really hard every day will not benefit. They don't have a job. They don't have the opportunity to benefit from it. They may have a property, but it's not in their names. They are working very hard, unrewarded. Has the government turned a blind eye to them? I don't think the government should come up with any excuses. There are many carers who are looking after their elderly relatives and sick relatives. In fact, they are lightening the burden of the healthcare sector. Why does the government care for them? Giving cash handout is not a sin. We can address the problems that we're facing. Some members said that the government's attempt to dish out cash handout has been really clumsy. It is really in shambles. This care and sharing scheme is not a bad thing, but in the light of previous experience, the government might repeat their chaos if they were to do this again. There is no way they can reduce the administrative costs. So the government has to be biting the bullet and coming up with ways and means to reduce the administrative cost. And this cash handout is costing us so much administrative cost. This is taxpayers' money. Why do we have? Why does it have to be siphoned off to the administrative costs? Housing. Housing prices are very high. The rental is also very high. The whole market is distorted. There is a problem with supply and demand. I'm not sure whether the government has factored in the rental element. We don't have any rent control, and the rent is on an upward spiral. The rent proceeds are bringing a lot of profits, and the property prices are hitting historical high. And the property market is also a speculative tool. And if the rental is high, the speculation also increasing. So it is wrong for the government not to pursue rent control. There are so many people in poverty. We have 90,000 living in subdivided units, 200,000 people. There are 200,000 applicants on the waiting list for PRH. And some school kids have to curl up on the upper bunk bed doing the homework. I did the same myself when I was a kid. I hope that the government would redouble efforts. That $2 billion will be set aside for transitional housing. We all applaud this idea. It may be costing a lot of money, but it's important to address the problem. We have to make it quick. It's just like a PRH. The people will have to wait and wait and wait, and there is no end in sight in the queue. So I think we have to get on with the transitional housing first. $2 billion, if this can yield 4,000 units, but we have 200,000 applicants. This is nowhere near enough. I hope that you would increase the budget after this has been completed. In the long run, we have to identify more land. Third, harbourfront development. I'm sure that the whole of Hong Kong do have a high hope on the harbourfront. $6 billion will be set aside for the harbourfront enhancement on the northern part of Hong Kong Island. We would like to have a continuous harbourfront, central, southern district, and eastern district. We'd like to have this. We'd like to see this happen, but we cannot be too impatient about it. When I was a district councillor, we created a lot of sections in the Eastern District. There is going to be a boardwalk under the Eastern Island Eastern Corridor. The feasibility study has been completed. As long will soon come to the Finance Committee for funding. I hope that these $6 billion represent a glimmer of hope for the Eastern District, because this will expedite the development of the boardwalk under the Island Eastern Corridor. And according to the timetable, it will not be until 25, 26 that this will be coming on stream. And I hope that as long as they finish part of the section, they can open up as soon as possible. Next, $2.5 billion will be set aside for the lift modernization program. We've heard from the community that the application threshold is the rateable value per of the units. This threshold has not been increased despite the doubling of the property prices. And many old buildings, they are not a luxurious end of the market, but they are in the middle of town, and the rental level has gone up along with the neighboring district, and they are not entitled to the fund. I hope that they will review the threshold. There are many old people living in these old buildings, and I hope that they would have that much more opportunity to have it. The OBB 2.0 is going on. The Operation Building Bright. I hope that the government will get on with the second phase of subsidy. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the $200 billion Urban Forestry Support Fund. We support this because we're going to train up a lot more arborists. A couple of years ago, I talked with an arborist association. We talked with the Tree Management Office and the government regarding the training and indeed to avoid outsiders taking up their work. But at the end of the day, in Hong Kong, most of the trees are not subject to any particular norm. We have to set aside enough space for the trees to grow, and we can see that a lot of trees are running out of space, and they will break open the pavement, and the tree roots are protruding from under the ground, from beneath the ground, and all these are anticipated. The government has no excuse to say that they don't know about it. So we must have really good enough planning. The trees should be there for the long term. The trees should be there for the long haul. We have the tree saplings are costing us a few $1,000s, and they can easily replace them. If they do have this mentality, they won't treasure the trees. It would take at least 10 years to plant a tree, and trees are growing up alongside us. Now there were two beautiful trees where a luxurious estate was built, and we do have attachment to trees, and I hope that the government would have some importance given to them. The development of arborist trade would have everything to do with the safety of our trees. These are our assets, and they should be properly managed. These are good resources in our community. The government should step up the professional training and offer a clear career path for the arborists, so that more young people will be lured to the industry. Mr. Michael Look, my colleague, Madam Deputy, is very concerned about the outsourced workers' welfare and the protection accorded to them. The review is only halfway through, and I hope that the administration would continue with the review. And these are the hardest working frontline workers. They have to deal with the rubbish, and they should be given that much more protection. The contracts are changed every 2 years. Something ought to be done about it in the midst of no more delay. And I'd like to take this opportunity to pay my tribute to the cleaners in Hong Kong, and I hope that they would have good health going forward.
Mr. Siu Ka-fai. Mr. Gary Fan, do you have a point of order? Call for quorum.
邵家輝議員。
Mr. Siu Ka-fai. Thank you, Madam Deputy. In this year's budget, the EFS proposed 4 main areas of work, including livelihood, supporting businesses, supporting livelihood, etc. And I think the EFS is able to achieve 3 of the 4. But in terms of supporting enterprises, I have some reservations. Well, or should I say I have great reservations. The EFS offers a maximum 75% profit tax deduction with a cap of $20,000, and the maximum is lesser than last year. And for salaries tax, the cap is $15,000 per person, and there are also rates exemptions, but no waivers are granted for many licenses. The surplus this year is more than $100 billion, which is much higher than the previous year. The Liberal Party understands the move, but in terms of the measures rolled out by the government to support enterprises, are you really helping them? Are you removing barriers, or are you making business even harder for them? I have my doubts. The Chief Executive, Mrs. Carrie Lam, said that it is okay to vent our anger on her. For Mr. Bernard Chan, who is a popular or hot candidate for the next CE, he said the Liberal Party has been criticizing the government. I don't know if he was referring to myself, because I have criticized the government a lot. I'm a typical member of the pro-establishment member. I care much about the stability of Hong Kong, and I also realize that legislators have a role of monitoring the government, and we have to speak out for the trade. I support legislating to help people or protect people. If a piece of legislation would spell trouble for the majority, then that would be an issue. The government rolled out a policy against some person-to-person telemarketing calls, and we did not have a lot of time to speak our views, and now I have 15 minutes, so I would voice my view. For P2P calls, the real intent of legislation is to stop the calls or money lenders making numerous calls, and many people feel annoyed about these calls. As I said on many occasions, and Mr. Ronald Chan, on behalf of the banking sector, has said that according to the PCPO, for unauthorized clients who have not granted authority, they would not receive calls or even cold calls. So all the calls we are receiving from banks are actually from intermediaries of financial institutions. You are proposing an opt-in mechanism for P2P calls, and that is, if a phone number is registered in the do not call register, you are not allowed to call them, and there will be penalties. And for email messages and fax messages, they are already regulated by law. Sometimes we would make follow-up sales calls to our clients, but if we visit them without invitation, we would usually be rejected. Of course, you can take out advertisements or hand out leaflets on the street. But if my company sells a heavy-duty industrial machine, I wouldn't be giving out pamphlets on the street. So your proposal would spell trouble for many companies. If we are to obtain authority, a lot of manpower resources would be required. And some companies are paying $1,600 a year in order to inspect the register, and you would receive $43 million per year. But this would be a cost for businesses. And under your proposal, you cannot regulate calls from overseas or the mainland. And right now, that is where the majority of calls come from. Many call centers were relocated to the mainland, and those people are still making calls from the mainland, and you cannot regulate them. With the legislation, even with the legislation in place, Hong Kong people would still be bothered by the calls, and at the same time, you will be creating trouble for companies. I do not want to throw a tantrum. I just want to discuss this with you. We have to make it clear what is happening. Some people think that the business sector is powerful, but we are actually very humble. For e-cigarettes and heat-not-burn products, again, we are very angry. The government, healthy people, and some education bodies want to promote good health for Hong Kong people, and this we acknowledge. And they obtained a lot of reports on teenage smoking, etc. And now there will be a complete ban. My stance is that on the 14 or 15 reports on e-cigarettes, so we do not know which e-cigarette samples were obtained or used in the report. There are more than 1,000 e-cigarette brands in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, and there are a lot of underground factories as well. I cannot say whether e-cigarettes are good products, but now you are even imposing a ban on H&B products. I think you are focusing on the wrong target. So some of the big manufacturers might not be my voters, but this is about this is a matter of choice for Hong Kong people. For H&B products and conventional cigarettes, you say their harms are comparable, and according to electrical report CB brackets 21175/18 to 19 brackets 03, if you turn to the last page, you said you looked at 7 H&B products, you conducted testing on nicotine and tar levels, and you found that the levels are comparable to traditional cigarettes. Many people did not read the reports properly. For the 7 samples, you said for nicotine, the levels are comparable between traditional cigarettes and H&B products. For traditional cigarettes, the nicotine content is 0.1 to 0.3 micrograms, while for H&B products, among the 7 samples, for 6 samples, the level is 0.2, for one of them is 0.1. While for traditional cigarettes, the nicotine levels are between 0.1 to 1.3 micrograms. For tar, for traditional cigarettes, it's 1 to 14 micrograms, and for H&B products, it's about 4 or 5 micrograms. So the levels are relatively low compared with traditional cigarettes. If you say that H&B products are as harmful or even more harmful than traditional cigarettes, then there is no reason for me to stop you, because it would safeguard the health of the public. But if H&B products are less harmful than traditional cigarettes, and what is the logic in banning H&B products but not traditional cigarettes? You are not sending the right message. What kind of logic are you embracing for imported labor. And like I mentioned on different occasions, the chief executive wants to make more use of artificial intelligence in labor. I understand that at some point in the future, everything could be done by robots. We don't need any people for work. And as the chief executive said, we are at a stage of almost full employment, and there are 70,000 people waiting for a job at the labor department. Well, there are 70,000 vacancies for taxis. Well, there's a shortage of 1,200 people. So where does our manpower come from? We lack labor all around Hong Kong, but you didn't mention anything about import of labor. So how can our businesses operate? I believe the problem can be resolved by technology some point in the future, but this is not happening right now. So how are you going to support the enterprises? And sometimes I am angry over these issues. And for the cooling off period, for certain industries such as the fitness industry, there are often issues of, for example, intimidation or threats towards customers or stopping them from leaving. Under the Trade Descriptions Ordinance of the CNE, these people can be caught. They have committed offenses. Why aren't you enforcing those laws, but instead creating new laws? You are making life very difficult for the industries in terms of, well, you are not removing barriers for businesses. You are creating even heavier burdens on companies. And in terms of occupational safety and health legislation, the government has enhanced some penalties on employers in terms of occupational injuries. If employers can be fined up to $500,000 and about 12 months in prison if they are not providing the safety measures. You said in the past the punishments were only about $27,000, and you are raising the penalties to $6 million or 10% of the revenue of a company or employer. For industrial accidents, despite the safety equipment provided by employers, sometimes employees do not use the equipment, and that has led to some accidents. From 1998 to 2016, the number of deaths from accidents have dropped 3 or 4 times. So you can see efforts have been made. According to court judgments, the average compensation was $27,000. That is why you are proposing heavier punishments. If the sentences were too, or the sanctions were too low, did you look at the reason? Would it be that employees might be to blame as well? Over the past year, there were 4,000 prosecutions on employers, but less than 10 prosecutions on employees. You should actually educate employees instead of resorting to further legislation casually by substantially enhancing the penalties. A lot of businesses would be discouraged from operating. If you impose a punishment of 10% of their revenue, they cannot stay afloat. And these are all not conducive to businesses. So if you are to support enterprises, you should start with the basics. You should not be so harsh. And you should discuss with the public on what should be done. instead of resorting to populist thinking. This would be unfair to the business sector. Thank you.
Mr. Felix Chung Kwok Pan. Thank you, President. I have criticized the administration in addition to Mr. Shilka Fai. Maybe he does it within council, I may do it outside the council. Why is it that the establishment camp is also taking the administration to court? Because you are getting populist. You are imposing policies on developers, for example. There is the vacancy tax, and then there are other policies affecting SMEs. I don't know why you are doing all that without achieving any effect. If you do something with a certain effect, then I would go for it. But then, as Mr. Shiu was saying, you are not achieving any effect. Coming back to the budget, when the FS said you have just like 40 billion to 50 billion in terms of surplus. Well, actually, at that time, we thought it would be at least 70 billion, but now it is 90 billion. In other words, 2/3 of what you had last year. Now you have a structural surplus. Every year you have about 100 billion in surplus. So you have the money and you should be able to do a lot. The first thing is, well, we are worried that Hong Kong has no land and you need to go for Lantau tomorrow. And then if you use 500 to 600 billion, you're going to throw all the money into the sea. And every year you have a surplus of about 100 billion. And you use a portion of it and that will already be enough for reclamation. Therefore, don't have to worry about the reclamation cost. You definitely have money for it. You don't even have to dip into the reserves or the foreign exchange fund. We support reclamation. It is not a difficult thing. You should go for it right away. If you don't have land, you cannot do anything. And reclamation has always been a way to create land for Hong Kong, and we have been very successful. Look at Tseung Kwan O, housing 500,000 people. If we had not reclaimed land in Tseung Kwan O, where would these people be today? So I hope you will do it as soon as possible. You have money, you can do a lot of things, but does it mean that money is the be-all and end-all of everything? Not necessarily. Let us look at healthcare. People say it is not working, we don't have enough doctors. But you have money. You are building hospitals. You have got 100 to 200 billion for building hospitals. And you are going to buy new medical equipment. You have the hardware, but not the software. So many years ago, we already said that we should import medical staff. And finally, this is being discussed. But always, the Medical Council is standing in the way, and the Medical Council, of course, angered everybody almost in the community recently. I believe they dare not stand in the way anymore. So I believe we should be able to import doctors quite soon, especially children of Hong Kong people who have read medicine overseas. I believe it would be so good if we can do it. But that takes time. It takes time for overseas doctors to apply to come to Hong Kong. However, the medical system is saturated. And now that you have money, you can do one thing. You can increase the scope of service of the healthcare voucher. You can lower the age threshold to 55 and you can increase the amount. So those who have the voucher can patronize private clinics. So we can divert some patients to the private system so as to lessen the burden on public hospitals. And then one more thing. All parties of the political spectrum have agreed that you should give more subsidies to medication, particularly that for rare diseases. This year, 400 more 400 million more has been put aside. Now that you have 40 billion, can you increase that to 1 billion? And then for new medication, can you increase it from 1.5 billion to even more? Well, you now have 90 billion in surplus, and I'm only asking you to use about 800 million to 1 billion to treat people with new medication and also rare diseases. I don't think anyone would object. I believe all members of the entire political spectrum will back you if you do this. There is one more thing, welfare facilities. You say 200 or 20 billion will be used to buy 60 properties, and each would cost 300 million. I don't know what you can buy. You can't buy a building. And of course, that amount will be too much for a unit. So where can you look for the desired properties? I don't know what you have in mind. Now, if you can identify the premises, of course, we'll welcome it. But still, you are just talking about it. I don't know how you can realize it. Yesterday, I heard from Mr. Stephen Ho of the agriculture and fisheries sector, and I can say I share his views. I said to Mr. Ho, you are not alone. I'm with you. He said yesterday that the administration should study into traditional industries to see how Hong Kong should develop. At least today we have this seat in the Legislative Council, so we represent our sectors. How can you develop these sectors that we represent? Mr. Ho says you should do some studies, but then you have not done anything. It's not that there is nothing to do, it's just that maybe you don't know how to do it or you don't want to do it. And for our sector, we try to do it on our own. President, if you remember, 20 years ago in 1999, I believe you were involved in mapping out directions for the future development of textiles and the fashion industry. The administration funded it. We had $6 million as consultancy fee. And half a year ago, I said the sector should again do a similar report. We applied to the administration for the different funds for SMEs. I just wanted $4 million, and then it only gave us $1 million. That's outrageous. 6 million for 20 years ago for a report for a sector, and now 20 years down the road, you only grant $1 million. What are you telling us? Mr. Ho said the administration should do some studies for the egg and fish sector. Okay, fine, maybe you don't know how to do it, but our sector is going to do it on our own. And it's not a first. And it's not that you never supported us. You gave us $6 million 20 years ago, but only $1 million today. You mean there is deflation? But 20 years ago, your reserves only stood at 700 billion, but together with the foreign exchange fund or exchange fund, you have $4 trillion. So what kind of attitude is that? Well, it's fine. We can do it on our own. We can find that $1 million ourselves, even 4 million. We can come up with a report. And we believe traditional industries, together with research and development, we can create a new industry. And Mr. Nicholas Yang supported it. And the trend is for environment-related industries. This is the direction to go. And then I said to the FS about this, and the FS said, fine, it's not a problem if you need any subsidies. And then no policy bureau wanted to take it up. It's just like Mr. Stephen Ho. We have done something, but then the bureaus won't want to take it up. Therefore, I'm telling you, you are not alone. I'm with you. Traditionally, it is the CED Bureau and Technology, Mr. Yang, and the new product belongs to the Environment Bureau. So there are 3 bureaus and no one wants to take it up, but the consensus should be the Environment Bureau. However, nothing came out of it. The proposal was given to the Environment Bureau, but it fell to the ocean floor. They are only talking about MSW charging, and we have new environment industries proposed. Maybe the Bureau doesn't know anything about it. It doesn't want to do anything about it. But you are talking about new thinking, new industries, and we are already proposing it. And yet nothing has come out of it. Well, the FS is willing to give the money. He said, just let us know, we will help you out. But no policy bureau wants to take it up. So what are you telling us? This term government gave people the impression at first that, and I would agree with the CE, that she is very positive in promoting Hong Kong's economy. But then you are not doing anything that would really benefit our economic development and the business sector. That is why suddenly the Liberal Party has turned from an establishment stance into some sort of an opposition party, and we're criticizing the administration day after day. Mr. Stephen Ho is also saying the same thing. They have come up with a report, and yet you don't want to compliment their efforts in any way. We are very sincere, and we want to do something which will benefit Hong Kong's industrial development and Hong Kong's economy. And we don't need you to give us a lot of subsidy. Just let us have a policy, give us the policy, and the sector will fight for it. But even today, I haven't seen anything that the administration would do to support the upgrading of traditional industries. Actually, traditional industries can bring impetus to a new economy. So you have the money, but you don't know how to spend it. You're just putting your money in your pockets, and that's not going to do anyone any good.
Mr. Chen Han-ban, President